In the past 48 hours, we have witnessed what is, in the judgment of this commentator, the greatest effusion of leftist tears since all the way back on the morning of 9 November 2016. The deluge has been so severe, in fact, as to cause an unprecedentedly sudden rise in global sea levels, and at the time of this recording, it is uncertain whether Hawaii will still be above water in the morning. So what, you ask, could have happened to cause the sort of twice-in-a-decade paroxysm of mass wokester rage that is normally reserved for days when Donald Trump gets elected president? I'm going to give you the answer, but I want to first make sure you're currently seated and not operating any dangerous machinery because, let's face it, this is some pretty upsetting stuff. So consider yourself the recipient of a fair warning, because here it comes. A guy might buy a website. I know, it's a lot to take in, but do try to maintain your composure. We're all adults here, after all. I can't tell you the number of nights I myself have lain awake, covers clutched tightly to my chin, wondering how I'll ever be able to face the dawn because I'd heard that a guy might buy a website. Because when guys start threatening to buy websites, well, we ain't in Kansas anymore, Toto. We ain't in Smallville anymore, Ma and Pa Kent. And we damn sure ain't in Mayberry, Opie. Nope. We're in a new and far more dangerous world. A world in which there exists the looming possibility that if this guy buys this website, when and if you go there, you will find a free and open exchange of ideas, unfettered by any naked, clumsy political censorship that masquerades behind nice-sounding but laughably dishonest names like content moderation and community guidelines. And I think it is very, very telling that nobody is freaking out harder over Elon Musk's attempted takeover of Twitter than our professional media elite class. See, for a normal person with a normal life and healthy human relationships, it doesn't matter a whole hell of a lot what happens on Twitter, because normal, well-adjusted people do not spend 85% of their lives scrolling through social media feeds. But the people we used to call journalists, they very much do. They're freaking out about possible changes to Twitter because Twitter is the central facet of their lives and their careers. All the things that used to be involved in doing journalism, things like talking to sources, doing background research, pounding the pavement from one side of town to the other, trying to chase down a fresh lead, none of that stuff exists anymore. The way journalism is done here in the 2020s is, you lay around in your jammies drinking hot chocolate all day, and 100% of your professional exertions consist of scrolling through various Twitter feeds until you've assimilated enough white noise from the echo chamber to be able to deliver the 600 words of semi-literate codswallop that you owe your editor by deadline time. And if you think I'm exaggerating, just read the crap these people write. There is no longer any dividing line between news copy and opinion content. Even Associated Press news copy, which used to be the gold standard of journalistic rigor, reads now like a Democrat National Committee press release most days. Journalists absolutely love the way Twitter is right now because it enables them to never have to work hard. These are people who are desirous of having their information flow censored and moderated. Because if you start flooding the zone with all kinds of different information from all sides, well, then you might have to be a discerning person. You might even have to distinguish all by yourself between something that's true and something that's bullshit. Our current crop of news reporters, they don't want any part of a world like that. They know what the correct opinions are. They don't want to see anything that might call those orthodoxies into question, and they depend upon Twitter to make sure they never do. Everybody, or nearly everybody at least, claims to be a fan of free speech. But when you give them the opportunity to silence their enemies, to live in a safe, friendly bubble of comforting groupthink and mutual self-affirmation, most people will take it. And even people who think of themselves as journalists. The other danger, of course, is that when you do all your public interactions on Twitter, and you can rely on Twitter's team of censors to keep your critics silent and to insulate your work from reasonable scrutiny, well, that gets to be a pretty comfy little safety blanket, doesn't it? So now we get to listen to a bunch of hysterical moaning and wailing about how our democracy is balancing on the knife edge of oblivion because a guy might buy a website. But hey, at least these folks never engage in hyperbole and wild overstatement, right? Do you remember how to hit the music, Jim Eagle? the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where we absolutely love the fact that the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet got sunk on Titanic Day. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. Good to be back. Sorry to have been MIA. I actually had to leave town suddenly on short notice when Joe Biden asked me to hunt down that bird that pooped on him last week. I thought I had a couple of promising leads, but these bird poop bandit gangs are really stealthy, really good at evading capture. So anyway, what I did... Sorry? I'm being told from backstage that there was no bird poop, that it was a piece of flying corn, which had the perfect appearance of avian excrement that actually splattered on the president's lapel. And gosh, I haven't used language like that since the Clinton administration. I'm also being told that if I continue talking about this highly sensitive national security matter, I will wind up being the only white dude in Gitmo. So I think let's move on, shall we? I spoke in the open about the attachment that certain types of people have to online censorship, and I think it couldn't be any more obvious that leftists on Twitter, I mean the really hard-boiled ones, the people for whom their Twitter feed is their sole conduit for information about the world, they love the censorship far more than any conservative or any free speech advocate hates it. It probably goes even beyond love. It is a compulsive emotional need for Twitter to continue being as heavily censored as it is currently. It's sort of a perfect feedback loop when you get down to it. When I go on my favorite social media site, I only see ideas and opinions that I agree with. So my ideas and opinions must be the correct ones. Woohoo! And it would be bad enough if the heavy hand of big tech censorship was only being employed as a partisan exercise to make it more likely that Democrats win elections and Republicans lose, which it very much is, don't get me wrong. But there is also a much darker, much more sinister side to it as well, and this is where we need to turn our attention to some rather shocking abuses on the part of YouTube, specifically involving the black nationalist madman who shot 10 people in a Manhattan subway station earlier this week. And how do we know this guy was a potentially violent black nationalist whose only apparent aspiration in life was to see lots of white people harmed and killed? Well, because he had dozens and dozens of YouTube videos posted over the course of many years in which he stated those views very clearly and unambiguously, up to and including multiple instances in which he openly threatened to go on an actual killing spree against random white people on the basis of their skin color. So these were not only terrorist threats, not only hate crime threats, both of which obviously are felonies under federal law, but I'm also reasonably certain that holding a firearm up to a camera and saying you're going to go hunt white people is contrary to both the spirit and the letter of YouTube's community guidelines. And is there any evidence that this man's account was ever sanctioned in any way at any time? Nope, there is not. This guy's entire collected discography of race, hatred, and terrorist threats was still up and freely available on this platform until after the dude was arrested. They only pulled the account down after the videos started getting aired on Fox News. Now, for those fans keeping score at home, I'm not meaning to suggest here that any sort of political or racial double standard exists here on YouTube, but I had a video banned for saying face diapers are stupid and pointless. I had another video banned for questioning the claim that the 2020 presidential election was the most secure election in history and that there's zero possibility that any of the 50 results could have been influenced in any way by the unseen hand of industrialized vote fraud. See, you can call Donald Trump an illegitimate president until you're blue in the face, but you may not even intimate that Joe Biden is possibly less than legitimate in his own right. You can also spend 8 years threatening to murder people on YouTube, calling for race wars, hurling some of the most vile, most morally repugnant sorts of racist invective I have ever heard in my natural-born life, and that's totally cool. Just as long as the people you want to murder are white. Meanwhile, over on the fake cable news channels, they're feeding guys like this a constant diet of grievance and race hatred, droning on day after week after month about what an awful, backward, unjust society we all live in, where racism and the myth of white supremacy is the only lens through which the world is ever viewed. And the people who peddle that crap, the people who actually sow the seeds of domestic terrorism, they are the same people who insist that you can't possibly have free speech on Twitter, because then all the white supremacists will have an open forum and we have to keep people safe from racism. Racist is the worst possible thing you can be. Racism is the mother of all mortal sins. Unless, of course, you're a black guy who wants to exterminate white people. In which case, welcome to the platform, sir. Please make yourself at home. Threaten to murder anybody you like. Hurl whatever sort of racist abuse suits your fancy. And you will have no trouble from us or our content moderators. You may have also noticed that the NYPD in the All Points Bulletin they issued for this armed and dangerous spree shooter who was still on the loose, they refused to call him black. At first it was male individual, 5'5", medium build. Because, yeah, that's useful. Then his ass was still at large a day and a half later, and they finally made the bold concession of updating the description to say, dark-skinned individual. Imagine if this guy had harmed more people, or God forbid, taken someone's life during the 2 days he was at large, just because NYPD decided that their woke sensibilities were more important than giving the public an accurate and precise description of the crazed gunman who was still on the loose, still armed, still had already shot 10 people. And please, if there is some wokester within the sound of my voice, I would love to hear the explanation for why it is offensive to call a black guy, because I am at a loss. I don't even have a working theory for this one. But, as always, I am more than eager to be educated. Now, I want to take a trip in our minds back to the aftermath of the 2016 election. Not the immediate aftermath, when all of the purple-haired land whales were screaming at the sky, as fun as that was. But it was later on, in the summer, maybe it was the early fall of 2017, when Google held that management meeting, the audio of which was leaked and disseminated by Project Veritas, because James O'Keefe does the Lord's work, in which the CEO of the company sat up there and said, almost matter-of-factly, that we didn't do enough to prevent Trump getting elected, and we need to do a better job the next time. And frankly, I still don't understand why that story disappeared so quickly, even from the conservative press, because that is very shocking, extremely troubling stuff right there. That is the head of a major U.S. corporation expressing his disappointment at having failed to successfully rig the result of a presidential election and pledging to not fail again the next time. And they didn't fail, did they? They improved their cross-platform cooperation and coordination. They ramped up the censorship. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars, each of them, to maximize voter turnout, but only in heavily Democratic areas. And when the October surprise hit, when the Hunter Biden laptop story dropped, you had all hands on deck, Facebook, Twitter, Google, the whole lot, and it took them less than 36 hours to slam the lid down on that story and effectively erase it from existence. Was the 2020 election stolen? We can't say for sure, not until we have direct, compelling, irrefutable evidence to that effect, but we have all the evidence we could ever need that the election was rigged, because the people who rigged it told us they were going to rig it. And we also have multiple polls in which 17 to 20% of Biden voters say they would not have voted for him if they had known about the laptop. So if you're a guy like Elon Musk, the richest African American in world history, a guy who understands why this country is great and what made it that way, a guy with a firm grasp of the importance of free expression and an open exchange of opposing views, a guy who's got no dog in any political race but simply believes the things that we all used to agree on up until about 5 minutes ago, if you're him and you look around and see a world in which your fellow billionaire oligarchs are waging an all-out war to smash free expression and to impose rigid, mandatory ideological conformity, and you're the only guy in a position to do something about it, then I say thank heaven for a rich guy with some moral scruples who is willing to put his money where his mouth is. I don't think there's anything complicated about Musk's thinking here. Even though the mouth-breathing idiots on CNN and MSNBC are still sitting there going, do you think this is real? All right, hey dumbasses. The guy made a best and final offer to purchase the entire company at an 18% premium per share, and he did it in public. I know you guys are in the fake news business, but take my word for it here. This is about as real as it gets. And make no mistake, Mr. Musk, bless his African-American heart, he's got these fuckers by the short and curlies, dude. There simply is no way for Twitter to emerge from this with the previous status quo intact. If they succeed in blocking his takeover attempt, he can just dump the 9.7% of the shares he now owns and crash the stock. If they refuse the offer outright, at 118% of current valuation without putting it to the shareholders, then they'll have the SEC up in their ass for failing to uphold their fiduciary obligations to the shareholders. Because you can't just summarily decide on behalf of your shareholders that they don't want to sell for an 18% profit. But hey, best of luck making that case in the courtroom. We're all pulling for you. No, if Twitter is successfully taken over by Musk and transformed into a free speech-friendly platform, the house of cards that they built in order to install the corpse of Joe Biden in the White House, it's blown asunder. It's not easy to thread that needle, making a dead man president who never impressed anybody when he was alive. And they did manage to thread it, but it took Twitter, Facebook, Google, the fake news media, the administrative state, all of them working hand in glove to pull it off. Take any component out of the equation, and the equation breaks down. So if you want to understand how so many people can be so deathly afraid to the point of ridiculous emotional hysterics over the prospect of a guy buying a website, that's why. And the more I think about it, the more I think the current epoch of American political history, the one that begins with Trump descending the golden escalator in June of 2015 and ends we know not when, is directly analogous to the original Star Wars trilogy. I mean the good trilogy, not the two shitty ones. Trump's victory in 2016, that was the rebels blowing up the Death Star. The ragtag band of misfits, all the odds are stacked against them. They hit a perfect 1,000,000-to-1 shot and blow the evil empire straight to hell. And they retire from the battlefield believing the war is over and they've won. But then you get to 2020 and the empire strikes back. The empire, in this case, being the media Democrat complex and the big tech oligarchs. Oh, you plucky little rebels thought you could hit one lucky shot and the war was over? Well, think again, assholes, because we're coming at you with the whole armada this time. We're not going to get lazy and complacent, and we're going to use each and every means at our disposal to crush you and all your hopes of victory. And from here, you will witness the final destruction of the MAGA movement and the end of your insignificant rebellion. The only thing we still don't know, of course, in this analogy is how the third movie plays out. I just hope there's no fucking Ewoks, but it's looking from where we sit today that 2024 may be a fairly direct adaptation of Return of the Jedi, wherein the evil empire attempts to cobble together a second Death Star, but it's not as cool as the first one, and they didn't finish it on time because the scoundrel bounty hunter with a heart of gold, Elon Musk Solo, punked all their asses by stealing the secret blueprints. And so the same pilot who blew up the first Death Star, call sign Orange 5, he comes back and blows up the second one too. The end. Roll credits. America lives happily ever after. Last thing for tonight. There seems to be a lot of controversy among people on the right about Texas Governor Greg Abbott busing illegal aliens to Washington, D.C. after the federal government has dumped them in Texas. Some have said it's a pointless exercise, a publicity stunt, or even that Abbott is actively aiding and abetting illegal immigration by doing it. Here's my take. Yes, it's a publicity stunt. And it's a really damn good one. I can see no better way of calling attention to the issue and moving public opinion in a meaningful way than by turning the nation's capital into a mass illegal alien homeless camp. Take the consequences of Joe Biden's policies and dump them directly in his lap. I see this as a Republican doing what Republicans don't do nearly often enough, and that is playing political hardball just like the other side does. I also am in support of Abbott bringing the border crossings to a standstill with the additional vehicle inspections. Because you know who's paying attention now? The governors in northern Mexico are paying attention, a couple of whom have already agreed to do more to stem the human tide of illegal immigration. We have a president who refuses flatly to enforce our immigration laws, so here is a state governor who's using creative and effective means to circumvent the problem, and I say give me lots more of that. And we will leave it there for tonight. Here is wishing everyone a delightful, edifying Easter weekend. I will see you Monday. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.